questions about conservatism to various speakers, whether it was Rob Smith, Dave Rubin, and asking, hey, if we're conservatives, why are we promoting gay people?
Right.
You're the person that is the face of that movement. So
Yes.
can you just tell me, I guess, a little bit about Nick Fuentes before the Groyper movement?
Sure. Well, yeah, that was my big claim to fame. That was kind of when I came on the map in 2019. But before that, I was at RSBN, Right Side Broadcasting Network. I was a freshman in college. I was 18 years old. I was at Boston University, and I was a big pro-Trump guy, and I was very into politics, extremely political. But like a lot of people, I was pretty mainstream. I was very pro-Israel, libertarian, big PragerU viewer, Ben Shapiro fan, all that kind of stuff. But of course, in 2016, everything changed. You had the rise of the alternative right. And so it's guys like Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux and Richard Spencer and Jared Taylor. And of course, Trump being the king of them all. So in 2016, everything changed. I became very racialist, very pro-white, very critical of Israel, very aware of the Jewish phenomenon that's happening in the country. And so I went to the college campus. I was freshman, 18, and I did a big debate with the student body president at the school. And it was kind of weird how it came together. I was pretty vocal on Twitter, didn't have a big following, maybe 200 followers, but I was wearing a MAGA hat everywhere I went, cafeteria to class, down the street. And I became known on the campus as that guy wearing the MAGA hat. And I would go on Twitter and I'd talk about my experience. People are picking on me. People are saying they were going to beat me up. People are threatening me, stuff like that. And I said, I was defiant. I was very pro-Trump in spite of all that. And so I got a lot of flack from the liberals on the campus, the Democrats, and one of these groups, Young Americans for Liberty, they came in and contacted me and said, would you want to set up a debate on the campus with one of your detractors, one of the people that's threatening you, trying to fight you? And I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. I had been a broadcaster in high school, so I said, yeah, let's set something up. And so they put out like an open casting call. They contacted a bunch of the people that had been talking trash about me, and they said they'd like to set up this debate, and they found the student body president. He was like a senior, and he was like some Democrat socialist or something, and I didn't even know the guy. But they set up this live event, and like 300 students came to it. It was like a big deal. And actually, someone Cassie Dillon, who's now known as Cassie Akiva, at that time, she was a fellow at Daily Wire. She was like, I guess she was working there temporarily. They had taken her to Israel. She had been there a few times, and she was studying at Mount Holyoke in Western Massachusetts. And she was involved with some of the campus groups, so she went to the event, and she live streamed it on Periscope at that time. And I didn't even know her. I had heard about her. I had seen her on Twitter. And when the debate finished, she came up to me and she said, oh my gosh, I just streamed that. You had 30,000 people watching. She goes, Ben Shapiro watched it. Milo Yiannopoulos watched it. She said, and you've got a bunch of different job offers. And we do a little post-game interview. She's asked me questions. And the last question she asked me, which is like the big setup for my whole life, she said, I just got back from Israel. She said, would you ever take a trip to Israel? Because I think you'd love it and so on. And, I sort of knew what was happening with Israel, but not 100%. And I said, yeah. I said, it sounds interesting, but I think I have everything I need right here in America. And she goes, oh, okay. She wraps up the interview and she gives me her card. We exchange information. I get involved with her. She was involved with RSBN. And if you know, that's Right Side Broadcasting Network. They did all the Trump rallies during the election. And when the election ended, they said they were going to start up a bunch of original programming. They had Mike Cernovich, Bill Mitchell, a bunch of these guys that were on Twitter. And she had a show. It's called Raised Right. And so she contacted Joe Seals, who's at RSBN, and she said, I saw this guy give the speech. He's really great. He debated this guy on campus. We should give this guy a show. And so I got in touch with them. We got to talking. This was around the end of 2016, beginning of 2017. They said, what do you want to call your show? I said, well, let's call it the Nicholas J. Fuentes Show. They said, that's too long. Nobody knows who you are. We don't want that. I said, okay. They said, you need a different name. I said, all right. So I watched the Trump inauguration, which was January 17, and he said in the speech, a new vision will govern our land. It's going to be only America first. And I said, I like the sound of that. I said, we'll call it America First.
So question, how old are you exactly at this time?
I was 18.
18. Okay, so all of this sort of happened 17, 18 years old, or this all happened very quickly at the age of 18?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and it all happened rapidly, and this was a time when I was still even figuring out what I'm about, because I'm a teenager, and I've been extremely political since I was like 12 years old. I read Thomas Sowell, Milton Friedman, all that stuff, all the libertarian, conservative stuff, even a lot of the neocon stuff, honestly. I was kind of all over the place. And I started to get red pilled. I started to go on 4chan. I started to go on far right Twitter. I started to get into some of these more interesting ideas. And I wasn't sold yet. That's sort of the thing, is I was sort of in this questioning phase, not sort of innuendo, but questioning, my political ideology. Like, I had these libertarian priors, and I had this kind of pro-Israel bent because that's just what there was on the internet at that time. All of the online content, it was PJ Media, which was Shapiro and Bill Whittle and Andrew Klavan. It was PragerU, Breitbart. That's what there was. But then in 2016, you had this alt-right movement, and suddenly you had all these other people that were in the conversation. Like I said, these guys like Jared Taylor and Sam Francis and a whole other crew. And so I really was open-minded and questioning what I really believe. And so that's really when I came into conflict with this establishment, something that I sort of began to figure it out and started to pay the price for this line of inquiry. And so that first conversation I had with Cassie Dillon, it prefigured kind of like my entire adult life until this point. And at that time, in the early months of the Trump admin, I was doing some digging on the Israel situation. And there were some notable news stories with Obama and then with Trump that made me ask some questions. In December of 2016, during the lame duck, Obama declined to veto in the Security Council a resolution condemning the settlements in the West Bank. And everybody called him a Jew hater for doing that. They said he was an anti-Semite. And I said, well, wait a second. And I was a big conservative. I didn't like Obama. But I said, wait a second. I said, it is the official policy of the United States since 1967 that we're against the civilian settlements. Every president, Republican and Democrat. I said, and all Obama did, he didn't even vote no. He didn't veto it. He didn't vote in favor. They voted present, and they allowed the resolution to pass. I said, that's consistent with our government's policy, the American policy. Obviously, Israel and America don't have the same policy on everything. I said, but now you have Fox News and Mark Levin and all the usual suspects are saying he's an anti-Semite and a Jew hater because he merely advanced our own position. I said, isn't that a bit of a double standard? Isn't that hypocritical? I said, and you know what it sounds like? It sounds like the left. You disagree with the left on race, and they say you're a racist. You disagree with the left on Islam, you're an Islamophobe, and all the rest of it. And so that was something that really set off an alarm bell. I said, something's not right here. And I wrote a big article about it on my blog. A couple months later, guess who comes to town for Trump's first visit from a foreign leader? It's Bibi Netanyahu. That was the first foreign leader that he hosted at the White House. And Netanyahu goes up there. They do a joint press conference. And Trump turns to him and says, I need you to take it easy on those civilian settlements in the West Bank because it's a big liability for us. Netanyahu goes home and authorizes the largest expansion of the settlements in Israel's history.
Wait, that's super interesting. Is that on camera?
Yes.
And secondly, on the settlement issue, are you both on the same page?
As far as settlements, I'd like to see you hold back on settlements for a little bit. We'll work something out, but I would like to see a deal be made. I think a deal will be made. Bibi and I have known each other a long time. A smart man, great negotiator, and I think we're going to make a deal. It might be a bigger and better deal than people in this room even understand. That's a possibility. So let's see what we do.
Let's try it.
Doesn't sound too optimistic, but that's he's a good negotiator.
That's the art of the deal.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's pretty obscure because, if you're not watching this stuff day by day, it kind of slips through the cracks. But that was the first foreign visit. I remember it very distinctly. And so I said to Cassie Dillon.
So you're just more dialed into it at this time because I was paying attention to politics, definitely, obviously, because I was kind of getting kicked over the BLM stuff. But I would have never tuned into that because we weren't really confronted with the alliance as much in 2016. But you're kind of dialed in and you notice this moment. And Bibi just kind of says F you to Trump and proliferates it further.
Right, exactly. And I was paying attention because I was really big into foreign affairs. I was a big Model UN kid in high school. That was like my thing. So I was really focused on all that. And I just pay attention. I ask questions. I noticed the patterns, so to speak. And so I had, at that point, I became friends with all the Daily Wire people. There was Cassie Dillon, this writer named Elliot Hamilton, a writer named Aaron Bandler. Those guys were Jewish, and I think they had visited Israel a lot. They were involved in Jewish groups. I thought they were my friends, and they were talking about, they were setting me up with a writing gig at Daily Wire. They basically did like a preliminary interview. They wanted me to work over there. And I did a lot of collaborations with them. I gave them interviews for articles because I was like a campus teen that was pro-Trump and all that. It was big fodder at that time for the culture war stuff. And then I started asking them. I said, why does the United States give Israel $3.8 billion per year? Because at that point, the new MOU had just passed, the new Memorandum of Understanding. That's the foreign aid for Israel. And they actually increased it. And they expanded it for 10 years. So I said, why are they the number one recipient of foreign aid? I said, they're not a poor country. And I don't even really know what the strategic value is there. I said, so why, since 1978, uninterrupted, have they been number one? And number two and number three, it's the same story. It's Egypt and Jordan. They're the second and third biggest recipients. And we basically pay them because they normalized relations with Israel. It's like a bribe. I said, so, what do you make of this whole arrangement? I said, is it because they are our closest ally and I'm missing something? I said, or are we being lobbied? And there's this deep contradiction and double standard, and it's obviously being enforced by foreign influence and money. And I remember they hated the line of questioning.
And when you say they, you're referring to this friend group?
Yes.
Okay.
This Daily Wire friend group, they were all writers there, and you could still find their articles online. And they, at first it was sort of playful. They said, oh, haha, very good. They almost thought I was joking. They said, oh, it's very funny, but you really shouldn't ask that, they would say. They'd say, there's a good answer for all those questions. They'd say, but the way you're asking it is anti-Semitic, they said. And we're happy to talk with you one-on-one in person, like they're going to teach me how to ask the question. They said, because the way you're saying it, it sounds hateful and it's wrong. And I said, I'm asking a question. It's free marketplace of ideas, I thought. So I kept pushing and pushing, and I was tugging on a lot of these different threads. I was also asking about World War II and about some of the narratives there. And I was asking about 9/11 and the Iraq War.
And where are you asking this? Are you in a group chat? Are you just face-to-face, like with your friends eating a burger? Like when you say I keep asking these questions, what's the setup for that?
We're texting in group chats, and we're even doing it one-on-one. One of the venues, we had a big Christmas party out in Western Massachusetts. And Cassie Dillon invites me back to her apartment with a couple of friends, and everyone's drinking wine. I don't drink, so I wasn't drinking, but we're playing apples to apples, and it's a party atmosphere. We're friends, we're having fun, we're political, we're talking about it, and this is the venue. And it just got increasingly cold over time, and eventually it turned into stop. Like, you need to stop asking or else. And eventually, I kept pushing on a lot of these different things, and Cassie hits me up on Twitter, and she texts me this huge block text paragraph, and she says, we're not in the same movement anymore. She goes, I don't really recognize what you're about and your views. She says, I'm pro-Israel. She goes, and the things you're asking, the things you're saying about Ben Shapiro and other people, she goes, I'm just not a part of that movement. And she said, so we can't be friends anymore. So she stops talking to me, cuts me off completely. All the other people block me. Elliot, Aaron, there were some other people involved. They all blocked me on Twitter, complete ghosting. And I'm shocked. I'm floored. This is my first encounter with this kind of pushback, because you go into it as an 18-year-old in college and you get involved in these groups. I was involved in the Trump campaign, YAL, all these groups. And you think this is the free marketplace. We're here to debate ideas. It's a free speech atmosphere. And I'm also thinking we're all pro-Trump. And that's another big dimension of this is me. Trump was a huge influence on me. He made me a nationalist when I was a conservative. And America first was that operative phrase. I wasn't any longer a small government, constitutional individualist. I said, I'm America first. I'm about America. And so there's this deep contradiction on the Trump strain in particular and what they're pushing. And I said it really shouldn't be there. If we're America first on China, Mexico, Russia, everybody else, NATO, why aren't we America first on Israel? So this was deeply disconcerting and weird and disturbing to me. And I was honestly just taken aback. I was like, why are my friends now turning their back on me because of a disagreement? Well, fast forward, I'm doing my show on RSBN. This is in my second semester, so this is winter and spring 2017. And I'm doing the show. The show's going okay. I'm not getting great viewership. Nobody was. And I get a call from my boss, Joe Seals, who runs RSBN. And he goes, you got to keep this between us. He says, but did something happen between you and Cassie? Because she's still doing her show too. I said, yeah, we had this falling out, blah, blah, blah. He goes, she's been calling me every day for the past 2 weeks. He goes, and she's telling me, well, Nick said this on his show. Isn't that so racist? Nick said this on his show. Isn't that so hateful? That's not conservative. He says, and she's been trying to get you fired, calling me literally every day for 2 weeks. I said, wow. I said, I can't say I'm surprised. I said, she gave me this very cold, standoffish thing. She blocked me, all the rest. He goes, not only that, he's a pastor. He says, she's talking to me about converting to Judaism, which of course she now has. Fast forward all this time later, about a year ago, she marries some Israeli guy and she converts to Judaism. But he goes, I'm a Christian. He's an evangelical pastor. He says, and I'm trying to talk her in off the ledge. I don't know what's gotten into her, all this. And so this was how my college career began. That's sort of what created me. And then for the next 3, 4, 5 months, my life turned upside down where it was these people like Cassie, this guy Cabot Phillips. I think he was a Campus Reform. I think he might be a Daily Wire now. His father, Tim Phillips, ran this big nonprofit, Americans for Prosperity. He's friends with Morton Blackwell from Leadership Institute. This guy was coming at me. He was on me all the time on Twitter. And these people were just pushing this line. Nick Fuentes is alt-right. He's a white nationalist. He's a Jew hater. He's an anti-Semite. And, me at that time as an 18-year-old guy, I'm thinking I'm just asking questions, I'm just doing what we're supposed to do. It's free speech. I'm America first, the rest of it. And then the first big hit piece was actually written about me by Media Matters. Come to find out, Media Matters sourced the material from Cassie Dillon. She sent one of my clips. And I'll admit, it wasn't the finest clip. I stand by it, but it was, the way that I said it was sort of unfortunate. But she took a clip from my show. She sent it to Media Matters, and they did this big hit piece about me. And then I had the left breathing down my neck, Right Wing Watch, Media Matters, all the rest of them. And this was kind of like the launch of my career. They were trying to throttle me in the crib.
So how do you know that Cassie sent the clip to Media Matters?
This was told to me by Joe Seals.
Okay.